My name is Gopala K. Vasudevan. Today I want to do a review for exam 1. Okay. So what is the format? The format is 15 short questions, 2 points each, 4 to 5 problems, 12 points each, and 1 to 2 short paragraph questions, 12 points each. So overall you can expect the exam to be worth approximately 108 points, okay, total, and out of that 30 points would be the short questions, approximately 48 to 60 points would be the problems, and around 18 points would be the essay type questions. What can you bring to the class? You can bring a financial calculator, you can bring a one-page formula sheet, and you can write down all the formulas you need. So please make sure that you do not bring any numerical examples, you do not bring any definitions to the class. And I do check all of them, and I will take any formula sheets that have numerical examples. So the last thing I want to do is, take away something you need for the exam. So I think it's for your sake I'm saying, please do not bring any formula sheets with numerical examples. Also keep your cell phones away, and if you have to leave the classroom, make sure you ask the permission of the instructor. Okay. Now I want to go through the chapters. So the first chapter, that gave you an introduction to financial management, and what are some of the things we talked about. What are the theories about multinational companies? So basically here we are talking about some of the reasons why companies go abroad. And we talked about the product cycle theory. Okay, we talked about the imperfect market theory, and so on. So you definitely want to make sure you are comfortable with those theories. So the primary reasons why companies go abroad. The second thing we talked about are, why are agency problems exacerbated for MNCs? So again, I think if you look at the textbook, it talks about a lot of reasons. Now some of the reasons are, first of all, it's very far away. Two is, people in the subsidiaries could be of different culture, and they also might have different objectives, simply because they are not directly connected with the parent company. So we talked about what are some of the agency problems. We also talked about some of the ways in which you can mitigate them, and we also what is the fourth thing we talked about? The third is, what are the ways by which companies go to one country? So we talked about importing, exporting. We talked about like a partnership. We talked about having a subsidiary, and we talked about a takeover. So definitely you want to look at those things and try to expand on them. And the last thing perhaps is, what is the value of a MNC? So here what we are doing is that we said that the value of a corporation is the present value of the future cash flows. So in this case, what is the difference between an MNC? The main difference is that in the case of the MNC, you also get cash flows in different currencies, so you want to be concerned about foreign currency risk. Okay. Now chapter 2 talked about the international flow of funds. So what are the main things we talked about? I think the most important thing we talked about here was, we talked about the current account. So what are the components of the current account? What are the components of the capital account? Okay. You want to make sure you're comfortable with that. And the last is that there's a very good chance you get some short questions, and based upon how do these factors affect the current account. So one example would be interest rates. So what the questions, if you look at the textbook, it says that it has a positive effect. What about GDP? GDP has a negative effect. You want to think about why that happens. And I think we also talked about inflation. So inflation would have a negative effect. And the last thing here is that, what would happen if foreign nationals were prohibited from investing in US bonds? I think that would be perhaps the last page or something of the chapter. And in this case, what we are saying is that the price of bonds depends upon demand and supply. So here, if foreign nationals are not allowed to invest in US bonds, it basically means that there's going to be less demand for these bonds, and when there's going to be less demand, the price of these bonds would go down, and in turn what would happen is that we can expect the interest rates to go up. So all said and done, the bottom line is that the main reason why we are enjoying such low interest rates in the US is because we have foreign nationals and foreign governments investing in US bonds. Okay, and that would go, if that is prohibited, that would have a negative effect on the bond prices, and interest rates would go up. The last thing is, we talked about the J curve. So what is the J curve? So what is the J curve is that how do countries try to become themselves more competitive in the markets, especially in export markets and so on. So what we said there was that sometimes when the country is not doing all that great and so on, especially to spur exports, what countries can do is they can try to influence the exchange rate. They can try to perhaps somewhere or other devalue the currency. And what the J curve says is that in the short term, it may not be a workable strategy. So in the short term, the current account deficits may again go down, and the reason why that happens is because if you go to the textbook, it talks about some of the reasons why that happens. One of them is that chances are the competitors could also cut their exchange rates. A second reason is that a lot of the time these transactions are preset. So parties agree to these transactions a few years back, which basically means that, or maybe at least 6 months back. So in the short term, the current account may go down, but in the long term, it can reverse itself. Okay. Now, chapter 3 talks about international financial markets. So what are some of the things we talked about there? So I think the focus here was on exchange rates. So what are direct rates? What are indirect rates? So the direct rate basically tells you what is the price of 1 unit of the foreign currency. So as an example, for 1 euro, it's roughly 1.1 US dollars. So that tells you the price of 1 euro. And indirect rate basically tells you for 1 US dollar, how many euros you can get. So how do we go from one to the other? So to get the indirect rate, all that you're going to do is take 1 over the direct rate. We also talked about the forward premium or forward discount. So the forward premium or forward discount, that is F minus S over S. So the forward price minus the spot price divided by the spot price. Then we talked about the bid-ask spread. So essentially what we said was, when you go to the financial markets, especially when you do current currency markets, there are two prices you see. The price at which you can buy the currency, that is the ask price, and the price at which you can sell the currency, that is the bid price. So part of the profits to the dealer comes from the bid-ask spread. Then we talked about the international bond markets. So less than 1 year, that would be the international money market. Medium-term borrowing is the international credit market, and then we have the international bond market. We also talked about the bearer bonds versus registered bonds. So here what we are saying is that in the US, especially when you buy a bond, it is registered in your name. But in the outside countries, when you go and buy these bonds, some of these are bearer bonds, and what that means is that it's pretty much like cash. It's a piece of paper, finders keepers. So if you own it, it's great. If you lose it, you might be in trouble. Okay. Then we talked about exchange rate determination. And what is exchange rate determination? So we talked about currency appreciation and currency depreciation. So currency appreciation basically tells you that in the future, the currency is going to increase in value against other currencies, while in the future, currency depreciation basically tells you that the currency will go down against the other currencies. Okay. Now, what are some of the factors that influence exchange rates? So the first is, we are talking about the difference in the interest rate between the US and the foreign country, and we are talking about changes in that. So the first one is interest rate differential, and what we are saying here is that as the interest rate in the US increases more than the interest rate in the foreign country, we can expect the US dollar to strengthen. Now, one of the things you want to remember is that we are talking about the real interest rates. We are not talking about the nominal interest rate. The second factor would be the inflation differential, and what it tells you is that as the inflation in the US is higher than the inflation in the foreign country, we can expect the dollar to depreciate. The third factor is the income differential, and what it tells you is that as the US has a higher income relative to, let's say, Europe, we can expect the US dollar to depreciate. And why does it happen? The reason why that happens is because people in the US perhaps can import more from other countries, which means that they're going to sell more dollars and buy more of the foreign currency. Okay. The other variable we talked about was government controls. So governments can try to intervene in the currency markets to influence the flow of money. And perhaps they try to do that to protect their currency. The last thing is we talked about expectations. And what is expectations? So here, people's beliefs about currency can influence the exchange rate. Now, the last thing is chapter 4, the last part. You can expect a problem from here, something like a 12-point problem. And I think we looked at two examples. And we talked about bank speculation based on expected appreciation or depreciation. So here, let's say you expect the euro to depreciate. What is your strategy so that you can profit from that? And the basic idea here is that if you expect the euro to depreciate, you want to borrow the euro. So here, always borrow the currency that is expected to So when you repay the loan, it will cost you less. That is the basic idea here. So this is a strategy, and based upon that, we did a couple of problems. Okay, I definitely encourage you to have this in your formula sheet. What is the strategy? Okay. Now, chances are you can expect more problems from chapter 5 and chapter 11. So in chapter 5, I think you want to be careful about what we did in chapter 5 and what we did in chapter 11. Okay, so we talked about what is a futures contract, what is a forward contract. So in the case of futures contract, you had the right to buy something in the future. So as an example, you could be needing 100 million euros. You want to buy forward contracts or futures contracts that give you the right to buy the euro at, in this case, 6 months later. Now, buying a forward contract is very similar. Okay. Now, what are the differences between futures and forwards? The main differences between futures and forwards are, in the case of futures, it's basically traded in the exchange, and always it's like the stock market. So the clearinghouse or the exchange always acts as the middleman. In the case of the forwards market, there is nothing like that. Typically, that is between two sophisticated parties. That could be a company, let's say Microsoft, and a bank such as JP Morgan. What are the differences between options and futures contracts? So I think the basic difference is that in the case of a futures, you have the right, but you also have the obligation. So that is the big issue here. In the case of the futures contract, you have the right to buy something in the future, but you also have the obligation. So as an example, let's say you bought some futures contracts on oil in 2015. So in 2015, the price of oil was around $60. And let's say you bought a 1-year contract. In 2016, the price of oil has become half of that. It's around $30. So if you bought the futures contract, you are stuck with this contract. So essentially, you have to buy the oil at 60 or 65, when people in the market can buy it for $30. So think about an airline. They can halve their cost if they had not used the futures contract. So what is the big deal about the options? The main difference is that in the case of the options contract, you have the right, but you have no obligation. So what that means is that sometimes when things don't work for you, you can walk away. Okay. I think the main thing you can expect from here is you want to be comfortable about looking at the payoff diagram. Okay, so we only talked about two of them: payoff for a call, payoff for a put option. So you want to make sure that what the payoff does is that it tells you the profit and loss. Okay, that is what we did in chapter 5. Okay. So let's go to chapter 11. So chapter 11, I think, is perhaps the most important chapter for the first exam. And one of the things we did, so the first thing we did was we talked about the money market hedge. Then we talked about the futures or the forward hedge. That is what we did. And the third is we talked about the options market hedge. Now, in terms of difficulty, what do I think? I think the easiest one is the futures or the forward hedge. The next one would be the money market hedge, and the last one would be the options hedge. So chances are you get 2, maybe even 3 questions from here. So you want to be careful, you want to be comfortable about all these questions. Okay. So first let's look at the futures and the forward hedge. So let's do an example. You have an obligation to pay 100 million euros in 1 year. You bought a forward with a strike price of 1.5. Okay, what is the cost? Okay, making the payment. Okay, so that would be the type of question you can expect. So I think the one thing you want to be careful about is that we are talking about the cost of making the payment. Okay, so one of the big mistakes that people make is that they assume that this is the profit or loss. It's not the profit or loss, it is the payment that you have to make. And what is the answer here? The answer here would be okay, it's pretty straightforward. So here it's going to cost you 100 times 1.5 or 150 million US dollars. Okay, so that's all we have to do here to solve this question. Okay, like I told you, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Essentially what we are saying is that you are able to lock in the exchange rate by doing this. Okay, now let's look at the next one. Let's talk about the same thing. Okay, now let's assume that you of paying the payment using a money market hedge. Okay, and if you want to do this thing, we need 2 more things, 2 more pieces of information. We need the interest rate in the US and interest rate in Europe. Okay, these are the 2 things we need. So let's assume that it's going to be 3% in the US or 3% in euros and 4% in the US. Okay. So that's the example I have. So what is the strategy here? The strategy here is that the first step is find the present value of payment. So what we are trying to say is that you are going to invest enough money in Europe so that you can make the payment. So here that is going to be 97 million euros. Okay. And what we are also saying is that how much money do we need today? So 97 million is the future value. 97 million multiplied by 1.5. Okay, so that tells you the cost of making the payment. So 97 multiplied by 1.5 should give you the answer. Now sometimes what the question also asks you is that what is the future value dollar cost? So if you are asked to find the future dollar cost, that is going to be 97 times 1.5 times the interest rate in the US, and that is going to be 1.04. Okay, so this gives you the answer. So the answer we have is the present value dollar cost. Okay, and what we see the second time is the future value dollar cost. So you want to be careful about the question. Make sure that you look at the wording of the question. So find the present value of the payment. That is the first step. Find the how much we need in US dollars. Okay, so 100 divided by 1.03, that gives you roughly 97.08. And then if you look at the dollar cost, it's going to be 145. And if you also find the future value, that's going to be $151.45 million. Okay, so these are the cost. Now let's look at one more example, and let's look at the options hedge. Okay, so the same question. Suppose we have an obligation. Okay, you have an obligation to pay 100 million in euros, and you bought an option. You bought a call option with strike price of 1.3 and call premium of 4 cents. Okay, what is the cost of making the payment when a spot rate is 1.2? Okay, so when the spot rate is 1.2, cost of making the payment is going to be 100 times 0.04. So what we are saying is that in this case we paid some money up front, and that is $4 million. That is the price of the call. So 4 million we paid, plus I think our actions at the end depend upon the spot exchange rate. So in the first case, when the exchange rate is 1.2, what that tells you is that you are not going to exercise the call. Why do we say that? The reason why we say that is because if you look at this person, if he exercises the call, he has to pay 1.3 for 1 euro, so his cost is going to be $130 million. If he doesn't exercise it, he goes to market, it only costs him 120. So here overall his cost is going to be $144 million. Okay. Now let's look at the other case. Let's say the other case is when the exchange rate is higher. Okay, so let's assume that the exchange rate is 1.4. So when the exchange rate is 1.4, what that tells you is that it is cheaper for him to exercise the call option because he gets the euro at an exchange rate of 1.3. So he will save some money, and his cost is going to be the 4 million, the call price, plus what he is paying here, that is going to be 1.3 times 100. Okay. Okay, so this is basically what you see. What I didn't talk about here, which you definitely want to take a look at, is what happens when they are receiving the 100 million euros. So if you're receiving the 100 million euros, what we need to do is that we want to see whether you exercise or not, and that is, in this case, you buy a put option. Okay, so I think I'm pretty much done with the review. So good luck for the exams.